Hey yo, this is Ryan with the Red Horseman here with another episode of 1919 vs. 2020. Today's episode of 1919 vs. 2020 is about the Boogaloo movement, also known as the Boogaloo Boys. And we're going to compare and contrast them with the lesser-known Freikorps, who were active during the World War I era. First question one might ask is, what the hell does Boogaloo even mean? Well, the Boogaloo movement originated from the popular internet meme Electric Boogaloo, which is a meme based off of the 1984 movie sequel, Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, acclaimed as the movie to popularize breakdance fight scenes.
They're breakdance fighting!
While also becoming the icon of a poorly rated, unwanted sequel. Mainly, the meme is used in connection to a movie title or sequel with the words Electric Boogaloo added to it, mainly to mock its poor quality. Beginning in the 2010s, right-wing extremists began using this term more and more often as a way to convey their concept of a right-wing uprising that will primarily attack either the government or the increasingly growing far left, which they aptly term Civil War II Electric Boogaloo. Since then, Facebook groups and other social media groupings have popped up. Most importantly, the Facebook group Big Igloo Boys, which had over 30,000 followers before later being taken down by Facebook itself. Despite the Boogaloo Boys not being an actual organization, the phenomena has seen steady growth inside established organizations, including the Three Percenters, the Proud Boys, and even the NRA, which can be measured by the act of speakers at their events wearing the so-called Boogaloo uniform of a Hawaiian shirt paired with being heavily armed. Although the Boogaloo movement has increasingly become a favorite topic of the media, lesser known as the historical organization of the Freikorps, the Freikorps mainly existed in Germany immediately after World War I, where radicalized, predominantly right-wing veterans of World War I returned home agitated by their defeat in war and the collapse of the German Empire's government. Upon these veterans' return, they found that socialists were rather successfully staging a far-left revolution later known as the Spartacist Uprising, which officially seized power in many cities across Germany, at one time taking over well more than half the major cities in Germany, taking over all of Bavaria and all of Saxony. In response to this, and with the sponsorship of the Weimar government, these right-wing veterans organized into a paramilitary, mercenary-like militia, with the central purpose of giving the Weimar government someone available for hire to assassinate prominent left-wing figures and try to bring the socialist uprising to a halt. By 1919, the several garrisons had killed tens of thousands of German socialists and assassinated several would-be figures who would have been the most important people in world history. In 1919, there was the Freikorps. In 2020, we have the Boogaloo Boys. The difference between these two groups so far is that one had the official support and a collaboration of the official government, while the second did not. However, the way in which the Boogaloo Boys do have the connections to the government brings us to our next point: doublespeak. Doublespeak as a concept has existed probably since the beginning of time, but it is commonly attributed today to the famous George Orwell book 1984. Doublespeak is also known as Aesopian language, whereby one's choice of words, whether they are from a writer, journalist, or speaker, is deliberately disguised so as to have two separate meanings. Think of it like speaking in code. Doublespeak is primarily used for political purposes, mainly as a way to evade censorship. Doublespeak in its modern form began with socialists. Beginning in the 1800s, governments in Europe had begun censoring socialist publications and forbade their production or distribution. In 1878, the German Empire under Otto von Bismarck passed the anti-socialist laws. Lasting until 1890, these laws banned any group whose aim was to spread socialist principles and coercively closed over 45 socialist publications, suppressing all the socialists in one of the core countries that had started it. In those 12 years, doublespeak grew to be in high use, so that entire poems, books, and newspapers could get past the censors and still get published. However, even inside a poem, a socialist double meaning that once the reader cracked it, could understand it. And the poem read more like a political editorial. In Tsarist Russia, beginning after the failed revolution of 1905, Bolsheviks encountered their strongest ever suppression yet. From 1905 to 1917, the Russian Empire had inside of it a rich culture of revolutionary doublespeak with creative ways of dodging and fooling censors. And it was working so well that historians now recognize doublespeak as a major factor in the success of the Russian Revolution in 1917. Thus, for over half a century, doublespeak was famous for being a tactic of left-wing revolutionaries. Fast forward to the end of World War II, and we find the reversal of the political spectrum utilizing doublespeak. After decades-long censorship of socialist material by right-wing governments, the Allied victory in 1945 now saw the beginning of censorship of right-wing material by socialist or social democratic governments, primarily with international programs of denazification. Today, far-right ideas, ultranationalism, anti-Semitism, and the like are also very taboo and heavily censored by the media. However, doublespeak has become a highly utilized tool among right-wing extremists. From the cryptic hate symbol 1488 to the phrase "all lives matter," doublespeak is quickly becoming the primary mode of communication from the far right to the center right. There has been no greater driving force for this increase in right-wing doublespeak than the behavior and outreach of the Trump administration. Starting on June 3, 2020, the Trump administration has ran over 2,000 anti-Antifa ads on Facebook, seemingly designed for a very specific far-right audience. More controversially, on June 17th, an ad was posted titled "Stop Antifa, Respond Now," displaying an inverted red triangle, which was the exact same symbol used by Nazis to designate political prisoners in concentration camps, who were overwhelmingly socialist, by the way, among other leftists. Twitter exploded from the controversy, and the Trump campaign quickly took the ad down. The Trump administration responded by saying that the inverted red triangle is simply an emoji, and that Antifa, despite not being a real organization, widely use the symbol themselves. Several reporters fact-checked this and found that the symbol is very rarely used, if at all, by anti-fascist organizations. Even worse than this, further investigation found that the first sentence that was attached to the original image contained 14 words, and Facebook Analytics displayed that the ad had been run exactly 88 times. As I said before, 1488 is single-handedly the most popular far-right hate symbol, with the 88 standing for Heil Hitler. But the Trump administration's dog whistling towards groups like the Boogaloo movement doesn't stop there. Actual legislation has been created to consolidate this anti-left stance with the far-right segment of the Trump base. On May 31st, 2020, Trump tweeted that the US government will be designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. The legality of doing so has worked out to be much more complicated than just a simple executive order. But you can go to congress.gov and search Antifa right there in the search bar, and you will see that there is constant pressure in Congress to declare Antifa a terrorist organization. It is not going to stop anytime soon. For example, take the proposed Unmasking Antifa Act of 2018 or the Unmasking Antifa Act of 2019 and the more than likely forthcoming Unmasking Antifa Act of 2020, which thankfully all died in the House. Although the kinks have yet to be all worked out, it's official legislation like this in principle that creates stronger bonds between groups like the Boogaloo Boys and the official government. The Freikorps of 1919 is quickly becoming uncannily similar to the Boogaloo Boys of 2020. However, the question must be raised on why this is such a big deal. I mean, I'm not trying to distort and blow it out of proportion that the Boogaloo Boys want to round up every socialist and mass grave them, but it does bring up a deeper meaning that could and likely will show up later down the line. What I mean is, the Freikorps dealt some pretty heavy deeds directed right at the many weak points socialism had back in 1919. Really, the main issue at hand is about nonviolence. In 1919's Germany, there was the largest socialist movement outside Soviet Russia. If the socialists had won in Germany, obviously the world would be very different. The difference between German socialism and Soviet socialism at the time was, however, very stark. German socialism was primarily headed by the Spartacist League, a socialist political party that was instrumental in the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919, which is often just called the Spartacist Uprising. What made the Spartacists different from the Bolsheviks was a strong dedication to being anti-war, even a revolutionary war, and an equal faith in reformism over revolution. The authority figures of German socialist thought in 1919 was the Spartacist League founders, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who espoused both of these ideas. Rosa Luxemburg is kind of like the Lenin of Germany, and was seen as the natural leader of the would-be socialist Germany, both inside and outside the country. In early January 1919, a general strike and uprising began in Berlin, and appropriately, Luxemburg supported the violent overthrow of the Weimar government and supported the violent seizure of German newspaper offices. This was in contrast with just a few days earlier, when Luxemburg and Liebknecht were more interested in party politics, forming the coalition of parties that eventually merged to the Communist Party of Germany, instead of focusing and preparing for the impending violent revolution. This was a fatal mistake. A few days later, German Chancellor at the time, Friedrich Ebert, hired the Freikorps to assassinate Luxemburg and Liebknecht and destroy the revolution. Soon thereafter, the Freikorps easily raided the Spartacist compound. Luxemburg and Liebknecht were shot on the spot, and Luxemburg's body was famously severely beaten and consequently thrown in the local canal. The socialist movement in Germany was devastated by this, to the same effect as if the Tsar had killed Lenin. I would argue that the reason lies in the Spartacists' lack of preparation. The intense anti-war sentiments of the top leadership in the Spartacist League led to a gaping hole in the socialist movement in Germany. What would happen if a peaceful or bloodless revolution, which is what they wanted, went south at all? And being far too anti-war directly led to those who opposed World War I to structurally dismantle any preparation for a more important revolutionary or civil war thereafter. In contrast to the situation in Russia, the Bolsheviks, unlike the Spartacists, saw the abdication of the Tsar and the liberalization of the government and took this as a sign to militarize the Bolshevik movement in preparation of any and all further violence, independent of whatever they wanted. The Spartacists, however, were caught up in coalitions, elections, and other party politics right up until the very end, and had opposite of them fully militarized enemy, as, for example, the Freikorps, and they practically walked in and off them. Despite whatever deeper differences the Spartacists and the Bolsheviks had, such as democratic control versus a vanguard elite, the Bolsheviks clearly won out in the following number one rule: stay alive. Now, how does this translate to the Boogaloo Boys? Well, America today does not have any revolutionary groups such as the Spartacist League or the Bolsheviks. That's okay. Groups like the DSA, SRA, or PSL are not particularly groups that will go on to form any kind of illegal provisional government. The pattern in America today, however, does still follow the pattern that happened in Germany, where the Freikorps formed many years before any left-wing revolutionary government formed. It was much more militarized with years of preparation and formed a much closer relationship with the official government than the revolutionaries had. Today, the far-right groups that are vaguely a part of the Boogaloo movement have already done this, and they've had years of preparations. Many of them are preppers and gun advocates who have all collected an arsenal of assault rifles and long-term equipment which will be very hard, if not impossible, for leftists to acquire after gun control seems to inevitably be on the horizon. The point of this is that the socialist movement as it is today, even with the added agitations of 2020, such as the George Floyd protests, COVID-19, and the new Greatest Depression, the leading groups in the DSA, SRA, and PSL still seek only to organize around reformism. It must be said that if groups like the SRA did militarize and form proper rank-and-file militia, is not a way of tolerating or encouraging left-wing extremism. It is a way to protect a once-in-a-lifetime political revolution in an increasingly violent and volatile political climate. It protects the values of workplace democracies, political council-style democracy, and prevents from more radical historical left-wing strategies from even having to take place or even emerging. The opening for a left-wing revolution in the next few years may very well be armed, and heavily armed if certain organizational choices happen to be made, but that also doesn't mean that there can't be a bloodless revolution, when it can even be a non-violent one, in an era where more and more confident socialist leaders are establishing themselves and changing the whole leftist scene into a stronger and stronger powerhouse. Becoming an accelerationist death cult like the Boogaloo Boys seems to already be out of the question, but it is a responsibility for leadership to pay attention to the safety of the socialist movement and the tens of thousands of people who are now part of it. Socialists, ironically, have no organized workplace safety. Revolutionary socialism has no OSHA. Socialist leadership cannot ignore the possibility of violence, unless they have no control or influence to stop it or harness it, or even risk possible annihilation. The Freikorps of 1919 packed the same punch as the Boogaloo Boys in 2020 soon will. Collaboration between them and the government will always be there, and it will always have the possibility of bringing the socialist movement to its knees. So these are the lessons that can be learned from comparing 1919 to 2020. Please leave any comments down below to your opinions on this matter. I know that there are a lot of Luxembourg fans out there, and I greatly respect her. Please let me be aware of any mistakes that I made. And of course, if you like this series so far and enjoy this series, 1919 versus 2020, please like and subscribe. And while you're at it, hit the notification bell because there will be a lot more of these videos coming. Thank you all for watching today's episode of 1919 versus 2020, Freikorps versus Boogaloo Boys, and I'll see you in the next one.